welfare programs, schemes for distribution of the wealth, and other programs which coerce people into acting in accordance with a prescribed code of social planning are government activities which today pose a grave danger to the individual American's continued freedom. A simple test can be applied to every government program. Do I, as an individual, have a right to use force upon my neighbor to accomplish a particular goal? If I do have such a right, then I may delegate that power to my government to exercise on my behalf. But if I do not have that right as an individual, then I cannot delegate it to any level of government. To be sure, there are times when this principle of the proper role of government is most annoying and inconvenient. But the creature will exceed its creator and become the master if government is permitted to manufacture its own authority out of thin air and to create self-proclaimed powers not delegated to it by the people. Once government seizes the aggressive role of redistributing the wealth and providing so-called benefits for some of its citizens, it then becomes a means for what is accurately described as legalized plunder. Legal plunder is defined by Bastia as, quote, when a portion of wealth is transferred from the person who owns it without his consent and without compensation, and whether by force or by fraud to anyone who does not own it, then I say that property is violated, that an act of plunder is committed, unquote. Once legal plunder begins occurring, history proves that each class or special interest group competes with the others to grasp and throw the lever of governmental power in their favor, or at least to immunize itself against the effects of a previous thrust. Labor gets a minimum wage. Agriculture receives a price support. Consumers insist on price controls. And industry gets protective tariffs. In the end, none of them are much further ahead, but all of them lose some of their personal freedom. The welfare state, and finally totalitarianism, has always been the end result when the principle of the protective function of government gives way to the aggressive or distributive function. This is a vitally important but seldom heeded lesson that history offers. It is people who work and produce, that create wealth. How much wealth they produce is dependent on how hard they work and how efficient are their tools. But all historians know that no government in the history of mankind has ever created any wealth. According to Karl Marx, considered to be the author of what we know as communist doctrine, a human being is primarily an economic creature. In other words, man's material well-being is all important. His privacy and his freedom are strictly secondary. The Soviet Constitution reflects this materialistic philosophy by placing its emphasis on material security: housing, food, clothing, medical care. These are the same things that might be provided in a prison. The basic concept is that the government has full responsibility for the welfare of the people. But in order to discharge that responsibility, it must assume absolute control of all their activities. It is significant that in actuality, the Russian people, even after 50 years of communist rule, have few of the rights supposedly guaranteed to them in their constitution, while the American people have them in abundance, even though they are not guaranteed by our government. The reason is obvious. Unless the people bake one loaf of bread for each citizen, there will not be a loaf of bread for each citizen to eat. Constitutions can be written, laws can be passed, and imperial decrees can be issued. But unless the bread is produced, it can never be distributed. The American philosophy of limited government and individual responsibility has enabled us to achieve an abundance undreamed of in ancient times, and the principle behind it can be reduced to a rather simple formula. Widespread abundance must be achieved before economic security for all is even possible. Industrious and efficient production are necessary to create this abundance. Labor that is energetic, willing, and eager makes such production possible. Such labor can be obtained only with incentive. Of all forms of incentive, the freedom to attain a reward for one's labors is the most sustaining for most people. Sometimes called the profit motive, it is simply the right to plan and to earn and to enjoy the fruits of your labor. This profit motive diminishes as government controls, regulations, and taxes increase to deny the fruits of success to those who produce. Therefore, government intervention to redistribute the material rewards of labor results in the eventual destruction of the productive base of society. When this base is destroyed, real abundance and security for more than the ruling elite is quite impossible. The advocates of outright socialism find little acceptance today, but many people seem to be taken in by the argument that just a little bit of socialism is good, so long as it does not go too far. History proves that once begun, the socialist welfare state is difficult to check before it comes to its full flower of dictatorship.